Okay, welcome back. We're very happy and privileged today to be again with Kevin Annett, uh, the Field Secretary of the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, Alfred. Thanks for having me again.
Well, you're back once again. Just arrived here back in Canada, and I know that you've been in Brussels at the court, and you're going to give us an update on that. But before that, you want us to give us this insight on rumors that are being floated about the possible resignation of Pope Bergoglio, Pope Francis, Pope Bergoglio. What what are those rumors, and what's this about?
Well, I like to call him the pseudo-pope because we don't believe he's actually the head of the so-called Holy See. What happened this last week is in Rome. They were commenting on recent trips that Bergoglio is making, and they refer to the fact that the Pope is suffering from new health problems, which may limit his movement. Now, traditionally, when the Vatican or really any government or corporation does that, it's to flag the fact that this person might be removed. It's almost the code word for, his head might be on the block here, people. Now, I believe that that's not unrelated to the fact that in the common law court case now in Brussels, being adjudicated, the third session that's now has been convened, more and more evidence is coming out linking Jorge Bergoglio to the Ninth Circle sacrificial cult and to an apparent power struggle going on right now between the Latin American and German factions in the College of Cardinals in Rome. So I think it's definitely, we're looking at the possibility that his resignation or forced removal or whatever might be in the offing.
So this is really becoming like something out of the old Politburo or one of these internecine struggles, or like those short papacies. Is that what you're saying?
Well, definitely. I mean, this is not unusual when you look at the history of the Vatican, especially in the Middle Ages, where popes were deposing and killing each other left, right, and center all the time. Things don't really change much in Rome, despite talk about reform. Their methods are very similar. But what I think is behind this, of course, is the hard evidence that comes out. It's like when we first began to publish the evidence of children being killed in Indian residential schools. It was based on hard documentation, people's eyewitnesses, and eventually forensic proof from grave sites. That same process has begun big time. As a matter of fact, in Belgium, where the court case is carrying on right now. As a matter of fact, when I was there speaking to members of the tribunal and in the prosecutor's office, the ones conducting this case, they said a conservative estimate is they're going to need a whole year to sift through all of this documentation. And what I do want to talk about today is some actual transcripts that I brought with me from Brussels, from the prosecutor's office, from a Canadian woman who has experiences linking Joseph Ratzinger, former Pope Benedict, or present Pope Benedict, to this SS child sacrificial cult called the Knights of Darkness, which appear to have a direct link to the Ninth Circle. So I wanted to discuss that evidence today as well.
Yes, and we'll get to that. But I still want to do a follow-up question on what you first said about the rumors that are now starting to come out about the health of Pope Francis, because it reveals a pattern.
Yeah.
Here we have a situation where the International Tribunal and the International Common Law Courts of Justice, using evidence, forensic evidence, tried and convicted Pope Ratzinger and found him guilty of child trafficking, child genocide. And then that resulted, as a result of bringing that evidence for enforcement to a friendly nation who went to Cardinal Bertone, the Secretary of State of the Vatican, that resulted in a resignation the first of 600 years of a sitting pope,
right?
Namely Ratzinger.
And Bertone as well.
And Bertone as well. Now, we have a similar situation developing where just in the first two sessions of the trial at Brussels, the evidence linking uh, uh, Pope Bergoglio, the Argentine Pope, to the Ninth Circle and the child sacrifices have surfaced, and already now
Yeah.
they're taking preemptive moves that they already did with Ratzinger. Is that a pattern? Or?
It shows that they're very edgy and they're jumping the gun a lot, which is always an indication. You know, Sun Tzu says in The Art of War that kind of behavior indicates an enemy in panic and on the defensive, really on the retreat. And I think that that's a sign of what's going on in Rome. You know, they do a lot of fog to confuse people, like the two popes beatifying two former popes. All of the glitz and media attention that went into that is more huge distraction from the fact that they're in a panic. They're in panic mode. They don't really know what to do now that this evidence doesn't stop. And the evidence is actually coming from within the Vatican. There's a source, two sources actually, two separate sources in the Vatican that has been giving the prosecutor's office documents, including from Jesuit archives over 200 years old, describing the Ninth Circle and how every serving pope is supposed to be part of these child sacrificial rites.
Now, you've mentioned a cardinal from Central America. What significance does that cardinal have?
Well, his name's Oscar Rodriguez Maradiaga, and he's he's like Bergoglio, a real political manipulator. He's from Honduras. He played a role in there was the Honduran military forced out President Zelaya, I think his name was, in 2009. This Maradiaga made sure that the military stayed in power, just like Bergoglio did in Argentina. He cushied up to them. Now, not surprisingly, Bergoglio names this Maradiaga, Oscar Maradiaga, as the head of Bergoglio's so-called Council of Eight Cardinals, which is his inner circle giving him all this advice about, you know, what they say to the press is it's the group that is advising him about how to reform the Vatican. In fact, what they're doing is how to really make sure that none of the evidence that began to just come out in droves under Ratzinger, make sure that none of that ever surfaces. Now, it was interesting the other day, Maradiaga publicly criticized a Ratzinger appointee. His name's Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, another German, a very close friend of Ratzinger's, who's head of what's called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the Inquisition. It's what Ratzinger used to head. And it's not just a body that's very powerful in the sense that it controls all doctrinal, issues within the Catholic Church. It's really the body that controls the clergy. And it's the body that had responsibility for applying that canon law known as crimen solicitanis that silences all child rape within the Catholic Church. Now, Mueller, in other words, is a very powerful figure as head of the CDF. He and the head of the Vatican Bank, they're Germans. There's this power struggle going on between the Germans around Ratzinger and this new council set up by Bergoglio. So that, it's a regular muck pile in Rome. I mean, you can never really figure out who's who in one sense, but definitely there's those two factions at work. And this Maradiaga is also the one who apparently, remember a few interviews ago I mentioned that there was a team dispatched from Rome to try to shut down the court. He was instrumental in that because he's a real political intriguer, as was evident in Honduras. He and Bergoglio, birds of a feather, and he's played a direct role in trying to shut down the court. So, I mean, when you add all this together, it's clearly indicates that things are really on the edge there in Rome.
Right. So it looks like on the inside there's a lot of disintegration going on.
I'd say that's a very accurate word to use, and it's not unrelated to all these problems within the Vatican Bank. We know that the money transfer that was going out of the Vatican Bank to German banks, interestingly, and to Chinese banks, that again has been happening very, consistently over the last 6 months. That's another thing the Roman people tell us, that they believe basically the Vatican Bank's insolvent right now.
Right, and the Vatican Bank is sort of a flagship of the Western financial system.
Right. Well, you notice both Barack Obama, Elizabeth Windsor, they all came to pay little visits to Bergoglio. And, I think that whole Western alliance is that was linked to the Vatican is shaky. I think the Vatican is probably jumping ship and going over to the Russians and the Chinese, is my personal opinion.
Right. So let's return now to where you've just come from, and that's the trial, the ongoing trial in Brussels, and remind us again who are the principal defendants that the court has before it in Brussels.
Well, the case that started April 7th involves Jorge Bergoglio, Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Adolphe Pichon, who's the head of the Jesuits. It's the Superior General of the Jesuit order. Those are the three primary defendants in the case involving global child trafficking. And one of the women who I met in Brussels described, and we have this on video, which will be released by the prosecutor's office. She described being at a ceremony where both Welby and Bergoglio were present, and the way she put it in her statement, she said Bergoglio had this penchant, this kind of preference of tossing children into this. She was describing it was like a pit, which and the same pit is described by Toos Nienhuis in her description of the events in Holland, the child sacrificial rite. She said Bergoglio liked to push people in the pit. Justin Welby liked to use electricity on them. She was describing the different electric shock tortures and things. She went into great detail, and she didn't just pull these names out of the air. She didn't even know these people. She's a fairly uneducated woman from Holland. Doesn't know Toos, but they're from the same general area. And she was shown pictures of Bergoglio and Welby without even knowing who they were, and she said that's them. Those are the guys who were at this thing as recently as 3 years ago, where children were killed at these rituals. So those two of the three primary defendants have already been positively identified by eyewitnesses as being part of these Ninth Circle child sacrificial cults, and there's a lot more stuff coming in. In a bit I'll mention more of the hard evidence we have about the link to Canada as well.
Now, just immediately after, while you were in Brussels, you met with a leading Belgian member of Parliament, Laurent Louis. Could you describe that meeting and what the immediate aftermath of that meeting led to?
Yeah, I met with Laurent Louis, a member of Parliament in Belgium, in Charleroi, which is one of the towns. It's actually his hometown where he campaigns in Belgium. And so some of his assistants were there. My high school French didn't really serve me very well in talking to him, so we had a translator. But it was very positive. As a matter of fact, it was reaffirmed to me there that he and his group, it's called Debout les Belges, Arise Belgians. They're a non-party political party in Belgium. They very much were committed to working with us, not only because we had information that could help them, but they wanted to see our common law court succeed into prosecuting these heads of church and state who are involved in active child rape and trafficking and murder. I think what's happened to Laurent Louis in being persecuted by the government, possibly facing imprisonment and fines, even though he's a member of Parliament, I think it's directly related to the fact that he was on the verge of coming out and publicly endorsing the common law court in Brussels.
And that's because if you trace back what the member of Parliament, Laurent Louis, has been doing, you trace back control of those pedophile networks to the Pope, to the Vatican, and to the UK Crown.
And to the Belgian and Dutch royal families.
Yes.
He did, of course, he was known and quoted in the media for accusing the Prime Minister of being involved in these same networks. And he wanted to reopen the Marc Deutro case. Marc Deutro being the serial killer of children who, in prison, was, they did the scapegoat thing on him, like Willie Picton out here on the west coast of Canada, made it look like he was the only killer, when in fact, in prison, Marc Deutro began to name members of the government and royal family as having come and participated in these sacrificial rites and the rape of children and everything, remarkably akin to the description of Ninth Circle rituals. So when Laurent Louis wanted to open the Marc Dutroux case as well. That was a definite red flag to the government, I think.
Right, right. So where does the trial process stand now? You mentioned it was in its third session, and where's it going?
It convened had a brief recess after the second session to allow the prosecutor's office to put out an appeal for special deputies to take direct action to stop these child sacrificial networks around the world because of information, for example, that we put up online at itccs.org over the last month. One of the confirmed sites where child sacrifice goes on with Ninth Circle and Roman Catholic guidance is at the one of the largest cathedrals in Montreal, Canada, Marie Reine du Monde, Mary Queen of the World Cathedral, Catholic Cathedral in Montreal, where the next major conclave of the Ninth Circle, where children will be sacrificed, will be on August 15th. Now, having a confirmed place and date, the prosecutor's office put out a call for people to start volunteering as special deputies to go in and shut down these places, to try to save those children in some way, attempt to deputize the police to help them, but if not, mobilize the citizens and communities to stop these murderous actions, since clearly the governments and courts are colluding with them and with the Catholic Church in this. After putting out that call, the court reconvened, and one of the first, and I have notes from the transcripts of that with me today, one of the first witnesses was a woman who lives in Western Canada, and I've actually met her, interviewed her a number of years ago already. She survived the experimental programs that occurred at the Calgary Royal Canadian Air Force Base called Lincoln Park between 1956 and 58, where she saw several SS doctors, including with the SS tattoo marks here on their lower left arm. She saw those men ritually kill and experiment on children. They were members of a group called the Knights of Darkness, which was an SS cult in which Joseph Ratzinger, in fact, was a member. So, you know, what they're looking at now is hard evidence linking Ninth Circle in Europe to Canada, and in fact to the Indian residential schools, and I'll talk a little bit about that.
Right, right. So, why don't we go to that testimony then?
Okay. The woman's name is Gail. She's in her 60s now. She was, and again, this happens with satanic ritual networks. She was born into a family of satanic practitioners, and some of her offspring were actually sacrificed. Her mother was a breeder. She has babies for either sacrifice at birth or to be raised in the cult as a member. And as with Tos and another contact in New York City, these people survived because they were expected to be loyal members of the cult, and in fact they weren't. They broke from it. And this is how we have this information. She claims she was treated and experimented on by this man, Bob Armstrong. That was his code name. His SS number was 091374, and that corresponds to a man named Hubert Vasselow, Vasselow. He was a colonel in the Waffen-SS. He disappeared in Germany in July 1944. Was never seen again. But we know that a lot of these SS doctors in that were rehabilitated through Project Paperclip. That's been well documented. Most Paperclip scientists and doctors came through Canada. And one of the places they came was this site in the mid-50s in Calgary. Now, the purpose of these, basically, she was part of a group of 20 children who had been kidnapped out of the child welfare system, including some Aboriginal kids brought from the local Indian school, she claims. And these kids were tortured to death systematically. They had bolts driven through their head. They had parts of their body ripped off. They were like horrible tortures and rape and murder. And she witnessed and even participated in these things. The bodies were then disposed of on a mink farm near Calgary, owned by a guy called Jim Green, ex-RCAF. But it's interesting because Joseph Mengele's code name was Green. And here's another example. One of the children who died, she has the names of all these kids. Sandy Mitchell was the name of one of them. Now, my research at Cooper Island Indian Residential School, which is one of the main experimental Catholic centers right here on the west coast of Canada, One of the kids who died, his name too was Sandy Mitchell, in the Catholic school records. Now, what they would do after they killed a child is they would reuse the name, because you couldn't trace that name anymore. So, for example, in the school records, the name Sandy Mitchell would show up. And he died as well at the Cooper Island School after being part of a medical experimentation program where, as we described in our documentary Unrepentant, groups of 40 young boys were given injections in their arms, and many of them died as a result. One of them was Sandy Mitchell. The doctors who administered it were German-speaking. Okay, so here's a direct link. And again, the name Sandy Mitchell comes up both at the Calgary Air Force Base and at the Cooper Island Indian School, where SS doctors are openly operating. So we don't think that's accidental. This is part of a whole pattern going on. And here's one other point that very important in Gail's testimony. She and her husband, David, contacted the Canadian government in 1994 in January with the allegations of what had happened and demanding compensation, reparations for Gail. A member of the military intelligence wing of the Canadian Army came out. His name is Sergeant Dan Gasso. And he interviewed them and went into the records of the Canadian government and the Department of National Defense. He found solid evidence of this man, Bob Armstrong, and he came back and he was very concerned. He said, I really want to help you people because everything you've said is true. This is right from the horse's mouth. He said, but there must be some mistake. This SS doctor ran the whole program across Canada. He wasn't just at Lincoln Park Air Force Base. He was in many facilities, like the Thunder Bay Psychiatric Hospital, like the Charles Camsell Indian Hospital in Edmonton, like the Nanaimo Indian Hospital just down the coast here. He was setting up these facilities all over Canada, and they were very concerned, and this Sergeant Gasso was very optimistic that he could get compensation for Gail and some recognition. He comes back 2 weeks later, doesn't come back, I'm sorry, he calls him on the phone from Ottawa and says, we never had this conversation. This information will not go any further. I never said any of the things that I said to you. Goodbye. He was just turned off. And subsequently, both Gail and David were threatened with legal action by the Canadian government if they ever mentioned this stuff publicly. Now, you know, this is all now in the court records in Brussels, and it's going to be part of the package of material that we eventually publish.
Right. So that suggests we all know of the deep connections between the Third Reich and the Vatican. In fact, between the Third Reich and the British throne, between the Third Reich and the City of London Zionist banking family connections, between the Third Reich and the funders between the funders of the Third Reich and the U.S. government, namely the grandfather of George W. Bush and the father of U.S. President Bush, was a funder through Fritz Thyssen in the Thyssen Bank of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party.
That's right.
And this is Senator Prescott Bush, and they were all arrested. Well, not arrested and fined for trading with the enemy, and so some people call the U.S. government the Fourth Reich.
Well, yeah, there's a great book about all that written by Jim Marrs called The Fourth Reich, where they document all of this. And time and again, it does go back to the Vatican, of course. Now, we're talking about the same corporatist system set up really by Mussolini in 1929 when he established the modern Vatican. And that model of corporatism, which is basically totalitarianism, and that's being imposed all over the world. That's the New World Order, and it came out of Rome originally. So, you know, when you look at that in bigger perspective, none of this is surprising. And in fact, that's why in the work we're doing now with the common law courts and the training of sheriffs, and this is something I want to talk about now because it's kind of our response to all of this stuff, it's clear that the only way you can oppose that system of corporatism is by going back to the common law and saying these institutions that are criminal in nature we know they're disestablished. We've done it lawfully through the court action. At the Mastic Proclamation of April 20th this year, clearly showed that under international law, the Vatican, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Crown of England are transnational criminal bodies. They murder and traffic in human beings. They launder money for organized crime. All of that. They've lost their authority. They've lost any right to their property, to tax concessions from the government, from anything like that. And citizens are now empowered to disestablish those bodies. So, I mean, for example, we're seeing in Coventry, England, in America now, that people are actually taking action and doing that. They are occupying churches. They're arresting known child raping priests. And it started a real movement. So on my way back from Europe, I spent some time in America helping organize some of these common law sheriff training programs. We now have over 200 volunteers and 32 chartered common law court groups in different countries. In different cities in 5 different countries. So this is a really important development because it means that we're not just publishing the information and calling for justice. We're enacting that justice, which is our right under common law. And here in Canada, one of the things that's pretty clear, as in England, is we need a constitutional framework for this because there is no legitimate government in Canada or England or any Commonwealth country anymore. The head of state, the Crown of England, are criminal bodies, convicted criminal bodies. And so to set up common law courts, we need a constitutional basis for that. The authority to do that has to come out of a new political arrangement. And that's why in both Canada and England now, there's efforts to convene congresses where a constitution for a republic can be established. And that will be the model that kind of authorizes these common law courts to carry this battle further.
And could you give us a brief update on the status of the training program for the common law sheriffs and the common law enforcement officers?
Yeah, well, if people go to itccs.org, there's a posting about that. But in summary, as I mentioned, these nearly 200 volunteers, 3/4 of them are based in the United States, England, and Canada. Not surprisingly, and that's where the common law came from, so people are aware of this. In America, we have the best response, and in fact, the biggest concentration of people who are now actively taking training is in the Midwest. We have, for example, in South Dakota and Minnesota, there's over 500, actually as many as 800 people who were part of this thing called Restore the Republic, where over the last number of years they've been doing this already. They've already been convening common law courts. And they have sheriffs in that area who are part of that training program. These are serving sheriffs who are elected by the local community, who have the power to arrest, to convene juries, grand juries, the whole bit. Now we have these sheriffs now getting on board with us in America, and that they have an advantage that other countries don't have because they have that tradition where the community can convene their own courts through their sheriffs. So that's a tremendous step forward. There's sheriffs in Texas and Idaho as well who are taking the training, and ordinary citizens all over. They're learning about the common law. They're really it isn't so much learning about facts as looking at our own presumptions and fears that somehow we don't have the authority to do this. When, as you know, in a common law, the idea is that, and the reality is that law comes from the Creator. The people are under one law, and the government is under the people. The people aren't under the government. So when people say, well, how can we convene these courts? You have every right as sovereign men and women to convene these courts because you are the source of authority. The government is supposed to be your servant, not the other way around. So this is what we're beginning to teach people in the common law training programs. And we're beginning also to take action to teach people in practice. For example, there's areas where in Canada we have standing arrest warrants against 30 people, including Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada, officials of the United Anglican and Catholic Churches. These people, again, will be in some of the areas. They've already said, well, we're going to go and attempt citizens' arrest on these people. We're going to be occupying, seizing church property, that kind of thing. This is part of the training program. There's going to be a practical outcome, and that's educating and mobilizing the community to stop this regime of terror against children and general criminality.
Now you had mentioned that the common law court stated that there's a possibility that the Brussels trial may be ongoing for as long as a year. So could you comment on that? Or?
Well, having been there and looked at some of the evidence, I think that's a conservative estimate. You got to remember that this is all volunteer. This is not, a multi-million-dollar organization or anything. And it's operating very grassroots, but very professionally and systematically. They're doing meticulous cross-referencing of evidence. They need to put their limited resources in protecting witnesses to make sure they don't die. It's a longer process because of that, but it's also mobilizing a lot of people. I mean, I alone, and this is just my emails, not the main, headquarters in Europe that coordinates this stuff. I alone have been averaging 30 to 40 requests a day for sheriff training. Okay, and that's a sign of the response we're getting. It's really beginning to move to a whole new level, Alfred, and that's people are enacting. They're talking now about enforcement, not just the verdict itself, which is being established.
Now, speaking of enforcement, we're now toward the end of May, and you had indicated that there's a week toward the end of June where you and a delegation of notables, of enforcement personnel, of supporters will be going to the United Kingdom to begin to enforce these warrants against members of the monarchy, of others. We have the case of the UK soldier who was committed to a mental institution. We have outstanding warrants there. Could you comment on all of this?
Well, the main thing we're doing is we have this delegation. We're going to not only England but Rome. And we were hoping that Laurent Louis would be part of that delegation. I think that when the other side caught wind of that, that's when they targeted him so badly, because they couldn't have his legitimacy, being brought to bear on the work we're doing. But essentially what we're doing, Alfred, is the stand-down orders that were issued to all agents of the Crown and the Vatican were going to be enforced in a massive way. We have these orders that have already been delivered, and there's something else I should mention. In Canada, the United States, England especially, people all over are handing these stand-down orders to the police, members of parliament, judges, and saying, you have no authority anymore. You are now under common law authority. And you get us, even in Canada, where the Mounties are known for their historical knowledge or, even knowledge of the law, they are listening. Up in Alberta, northern Alberta, there was a meeting of 5 Mounties with one of our guys, and he was saying, look, you guys were part of a criminal body responsible for killing over 50,000 Indian kids. You have no authority. Stand down. And they're listening. That's the point. So the whole point of this delegation is to enforce that in a big way, to take this to a much higher level publicly. And we're going to be doing it. I'll be going over to Europe by late June. And we really appeal to everybody to contact us, itccscentral@gmail.com. Join the local common law group. And they're all over the place now. They're springing up all over, I could say, like weeds. But they're all over. And you can join the local group, get training, and take action during that time to enforce these warrants. That's really the whole point of what we're doing.
Yes. Now, you've been able to travel through the UK and through Rome without incident, correct?
Well, yeah, but in England, in May 2011, I was actually prevented from returning to the country, held for a day in an immigration prison at Stansted Airport, and then deported. But, our whole attitude, I was going to do that again the last month when I was there. I was just going to go in. And the people in Brussels strongly pretty much ordered me not to. They said, we're going to go in there with a whole media team, TV cameras, filming things in real time. There's people who are going to be waiting at the other end. So if they try anything, it'll be known immediately to the world. And that's the whole point of what we're doing. We really urge people not to take on the system individually, like people sometimes do. They say, well, I'm not carrying a driver's license because I'm a sovereign man. Going up individually against a system like that doesn't work in the long run. We need to do this collectively as a community and take jurisdiction back under the common law. We're really reinventing society from the bottom up, and this is a whole massive community effort. It isn't just the result of 1 or 2 supermen. And I think that's what we're really getting people mobilized on, that basis of taking initiative and not waiting for somebody else.
Great. So we've sort of come to the end of this segment. is there any overall message that you'd like to leave with our viewers?
Well, you can't do this work for years and not realize that what we're up against is not just a bunch of sick individuals or even a historically criminal system. This is a spiritual battle, and there's entities involved that we're opposing which are responsible. We have, there's a whole different aspect of what we're doing. I had personal taste of that when I helped conduct that first exorcism in Rome prior to the day before the tornado hit the city the next day. To me, that was symbolic of these forces that are being unleashed by confronting the oldest and most murderous corporation on the planet, by saying your system is now over, and we're establishing a new system under common law, under the Creator, where people are equal under the law, and anyone in authority who is responsible for these crimes will be stopped by the people themselves through their own sheriffs, the common law court. This is an amazing event in human history. This is light coming back to these dark places, and people have to be personally very focused on their higher self. We often in these events hold prayer and meditation according to the different traditions of people who are part of it. That's a very important part. I mean, I work with elders all over the world all the time to kind of prepare me inwardly for the strength that I need to conduct this. I couldn't have continued this long without that. So I really urge that to people to realize this is a fight going on many levels. And so I, in the same way that I urge people to take it seriously and learn about it, also prepare yourself. This is a long-term battle, and we all need to be inwardly as well as outwardly strengthened.
Thank you. Once again, how can people who are perhaps coming to this the first time or want to stay in touch through the internet, how can they get in contact with you, and how can they stay in touch with what's going on?
My email is hiddenfromhistory1, that's number one, hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com, itccs.org, main website, and the common law court site, iclcj.com. And you can also write, if you want to volunteer for sheriff training, be sure to say the town you're in so we can link you up to the local group. Write to itccscentral@gmail.com. And by the time I leave for Europe again, in just less than a month, we will have more updates about what will be happening prior to that new, not only the ongoing sessions of the court and the evidence we're going to be publishing, but that delegation that'll be going into England and Rome. We're going to be having live coverage of that as it happens. We already have a TV network in England willing to cover that. So that'll all be out during June, hopefully.
Well, we certainly want to thank you for taking time to come out with us today and bring us all these important updates, Kevin. And we want to express our support and gratitude of your work, and we hope that you can come back and visit us again from time to time and give us updates.
I sure will, and it's always good to be talking to Alfred. You're such a great support to all the work we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.